Hey, it's Trevor Locke from iCoachSkating.com. Today I'd like to talk about the axle takeoff to try to address what I consider to be a common misconception among coaches and skaters alike. I think that this topic is rarely talked about, and when it is talked about, I feel like there's a lot of misinformation out there. Anyway, I was prompted to make this video after some feedback I received recently. And as you may recall, I asked subscribers to take a survey comparing the body position at the moment of takeoff for axle, salchow, and toe loop jumps. And if you remember, the results showed that coaches were evenly split regarding the picture I showed for a single or double axle takeoff and that of a double or triple salchow. In the results video, I showed the jumps in slow motion to make it clear that a good axle does not take off in an H position. Shortly after that, I received a number of emails all trying to make the same point. Here's one of the emails, and I'm sharing it because I think this coach was able to accurately express what many other coaches were feeling after taking the survey and seeing the survey results. All right, this coach began. Are you saying that this picture is a correct single axle takeoff, or are you saying it's a correct double axle takeoff? I recall that the survey offered this picture as one of the choices for a single and double axle, so I chose the picture with the H position to apply for both jumps, because I would not teach this position for a single axle. Perhaps the survey should have offered pictures differentiating between single and double axle takeoffs. Now, we'll get back to the email in a second, but I wanted to respond briefly to these comments. For the record, the image I showed in the survey video was indeed from a double axle takeoff. Now, as we're going to see in this video, I really did mean that this position applies to both the double axle and the single axle. The idea that a coach would not teach this position, which I refer to as the sideways karate kick position, for a single axle is the reason I felt I needed to create this video. The coach continued, I use video analysis, and I must say that I see that the H position is very good for axles, if you want them to go up, that is. For the double axle, I think that the H position that was learned to achieve the single axle does change somewhat. There's two things I want to comment on regarding these thoughts. First, this coach is making an assumption that an H position is necessary to jump high on an axle. As we'll see, that assumption is false. An H position is not necessary for creating huge axles. And second, this coach is admitting that she teaches a double axle differently than she teaches the single axle. To me, that's inefficient. I'd rather teach the basic technique once and never have to reteach it, but rather just refine it. Continuing with the letter. My own experience with axles is that there are two schools of thought. One is that the takeoff should swing around, and the other is that the takeoff should go up. I am one of those who teaches that axles should go up, and I stand by the video evidence and judges' marks that the H position creates a beautiful, high single axle. Again, this coach is making the assumption that if a skater takes off in the sideways karate kick position, then their takeoff must swing around rather than go up. Nothing could be further from the truth. A skater in this position can have just as much rotational control as a skater in the H position and can actually jump higher. With proper training, skaters can get to this position on purpose without swinging around. So rather than hashing this all out in terms of our individual coaching philosophies or personal theories of good jumping, let's just cut to the chase and look at some video. Here's a nice axle. Now, without going back and looking, did you see an H position at takeoff? Some people see an H position and some do not. Let's look again. What do you think? H or no H? Before analyzing it in slow motion, let's take a look at a double axle by the same skater. Now, I think you'll agree both the single and double axles I've just shown are very high and look like powerful jumps with flow and precision. Let's look at the takeoff side by side. We'll use slow motion right up to the point where the skater leaves the ice. Can you tell which is the single and which is the double? Reason would have it that the more compact takeoff is the double, and in this case you'd be right. But let's be clear about this. These two jumps look almost identical. And this position is obviously not an H position, as the skater's hips have already rotated a quarter turn so that the hips are sideways to the flight path, and the skater's feet are more side by side than front to back. Here's the rest of these two jumps in slow motion so you can see how they finish. Okay, so that's one example. Obviously, we can't draw general conclusions from just one example. So let's take a look at some more. Here's another single axle. Again, did you see an H position? If you did, your eyes are fooling you. There's no doubt that this skater's free knee and foot come through, and that the skater steps up into the jump. But there is no H position. Let's look again. In real time, many people still see an H position, even though the skater never even passes through a position that even resembles a traditional H. We'll look at it in slow motion in a second. First, here's a double axle by the same skater. Here's the single and double side by side to the moment of takeoff. Okay, do you know which is the single and which is the double? You're pretty sure, right? Well, in this case, you're probably wrong. This skater actually has a more open double axle than single axle takeoff. Here's the rest of the jump, so you know I'm not pulling your leg. Now, the point I'm trying to make is that an axle does not leave the ice in a traditional H position. And I'm also showing that there does not have to be a significant difference between the double axle takeoff and single axle takeoff, so there should be no reason to teach them differently. Okay, we have two examples under our belts. Let's take a look at another one. Here's another single axle. Do you see an H position at takeoff? Here's the corresponding double axle. As before, here's the two jumps side by side and in slow motion, stopping at the moment of takeoff. And again, the game is, can you tell which is the single and which is the double? You can pause the video right now and see if you can figure it out, but honestly, you'd just be guessing. They look very similar. Here's how these jumps finish. So let's look at one final skater. I think this skater's technique is a bit unorthodox, but she gets the job done. Here's the single axle. And here's the double. And here they are in slow motion. Definitely not an H position at takeoff. Alright, let's summarize. In this video, you've seen 4 different skaters do single and double axle. Not one of those 8 jumps had an H position at takeoff. Additionally, not a single one of those jumps had an air time of less than 0.45 seconds, which corresponds roughly to a jump height of 10 inches. Obviously, these skaters are able to create high single and double axles without an H position. And it's clear from watching these jumps in real time that none of these jumps go around or are spinny. So, the takeaways from this video are, number 1, an H position is not required for a high axle. Number 2, an H position is not required to prevent an axle from being spinny or jumping around. And number 3, a skater can use essentially identical technique when taking off for the single axle and the double axle. If we watched a lot more video, we would discover that these findings are very typical. To generalize, pretty much all good double axles have the hips sideways to the flight path at takeoff. I've shown you 4. If we adhere to the coaching philosophy that we should be teaching the single axle in a way that allows skaters to do a double without significantly changing their technique, then we have to accept that we're not trying to create an H position at the moment of takeoff. In other words, we do not want the skater's hips square to the direction of the jump at takeoff. Now, after watching only 4 skaters, we can't make the claim that nobody actually hits a true H position when doing an axle. But the fact is, from my experience of analyzing hundreds of axles, and double axles and triple axles, almost nobody actually does an H. Now, please keep in mind that I'm not saying that coaches shouldn't tell their skaters to try to hit an H position when going up into an axle. The simple fact is, this approach to teaching the jump does work for many skaters. But it doesn't work for many other skaters who take what their coaches say very literally. And the H position description causes many, many problems once a skater gets to the double axle. I've got a lot more to show you in terms of axle takeoffs, but that will have to wait until another video. I hope this discussion was helpful. Take care.